I want to talk about an absolute mess of an organization, the Charlotte Hornets, a team that hasn't made the playoffs in 10 years, haven't been in the second round since 2002, and they've just totally botched the situation with LaMelo Ball. I know LaMelo called the reporter a clown. His camp claims none of it's true. NBA fans, we've seen this over and over again. When smoke like this comes out, you know that there's fire there. So I have no doubt that he genuinely would rather not be on the Hornets. And whether he's formally asked the team for a trade or not doesn't really matter. The point is it's now out there, and it's not hard to see why. LaMelo's gotten some flack, and he's been called not a winning player. I don't think you can judge whether or not any player on the Hornets is a winning player based on the way the organization performs over the last 10 years. And it makes me wonder if they're even interested in winning, because they never build anything. It's always for the future. And this is a misunderstanding of team building that permeates throughout the NBA and throughout fan bases as well. This notion that if you have a young team, you shouldn't be interested in adding an expensive veteran who's going to make you the 7 seed. It's better if you're the 12 seed, or it's better to have a top 10 pick than to make the playoffs. And I just disagree with that approach. And the way the Hornets have been middling around in less than mediocrity, like mediocrity would be an improvement, is proof of that. You can't just constantly be drafting young guys with no infrastructure for growing them or starting to win. The best this team has done is a play-in appearance in which they didn't come out of a few years ago. But other than that, LaMelo Ball has not played a consequential game in his career. He's got long-term money locked in with his current contract, but if he wants to actually play in meaningful games, he'll need to go elsewhere. This Charlotte organization, I called it out multiple times. First, where I talked about Domantas Sabonis getting traded there, I mentioned that the Hornets needed to do something to leapfrog into the group in the East. They've done nothing. I mentioned it in the over-under episode that I was really disappointed throughout the summer that they didn't do anything. They clearly needed to add a starting level veteran player that could help this team get to the playoffs, so that you support your number one. You drafted him with the number 3 overall pick. You spent that kind of capital on him. He showed promise immediately. You didn't do anything to foster his growth to see if he's actually a number one. I think he showed enough to at least get that opportunity. They were in this tank mode. Only young players. The veterans we do have are lower level veterans that aren't actually going to make a meaningful improvement to our record. The Hornets did not want to have a 6, 7, 8 seed record, and I believe that's to their detriment. There are fans and analysts that believe that you don't want to be in that area of the standings. I firmly disagree. I think you need to start winning. You get a player like LaMelo Ball on your team, try to be good, try to actually win. Yeah, you're not going to be a top 4 team in the East, but it doesn't matter. Get them in the playoffs, get them those reps. You start to build a little something, a little competitive nature. You get some veterans to sign with you. Try to make the team good. And they just haven't done that. They've been content with being below mediocre for years now. And so it's no surprise why LaMelo wants to leave. Who wants to play out their career there? And then he'll get criticism that he doesn't care about winning. Take care of the players, right? You get drafted by the Charlotte Hornets and you're labeled a losing player. And then if you want to be traded, you're labeled as a malcontent that wants to request a trade from their team. This team is awful. They clearly do not want to invest in his growth or the growth of the team. They want to continue to be in the top 10 of the draft, and they're just waiting around. They've been waiting around ever since they missed out on Anthony Davis when they were the Charlotte Bobcats. That's how long they've been waiting around. But they're waiting for something like that, and they're hoping that they get the top pick in the draft and they find their new number one. But LaMelo doesn't have time to wait for that. So he needs to move on. The team needs to move on from him. The question is, what do they want in return? My guess is only young players and picks, because they haven't demonstrated any desire ever since they signed Gordon Hayward. That was the last time they actually made a meaningful veteran addition. Outside of that, it's been these lower level moves like Colin Sexton, those types of things. They don't want their record to be that good. So it's time to leave if you're LaMelo. I know he's had injury issues, but I think he's still a highly valuable player. He's an exciting player. I think he contributes a lot to your team offensively, and I think he's a better defender than he gets credit for because of his length. Not an on-ball defender, but the type of team defender that can get a lot of steals and cause disruption with his long arms. So I would be interested in LaMelo. I just did an episode about Ja Morant trade scenarios. I think a lot of those teams apply here. Sacramento's the most likely, in my opinion. I called them out as the most likely for Ja Morant, but I think they're even more likely for LaMelo because of Vivek Ranadive's obsession with Steph Curry. I could see him just getting enamored with LaMelo Ball and telling his front office, do what you have to do to acquire this guy. So I could see that as the most likely destination. Brooklyn, very likely as well. Houston's not going to be a part of this. LaMelo's not reliable enough from a health perspective to risk their window that they've opened up with this Durant trade. A couple other teams I wanted to talk about, though, for trade scenarios. The Minnesota Timberwolves, I think, are actually a really good fit with LaMelo. The problem is they've given away too many trade assets that they just can't do it. They have their pick allocated as either a swap or they traded it outright every year until 2032, and the 2032 pick is frozen because they were a second apron team last year, and they cannot unfreeze that until they're under the second apron for 3 seasons. That's part of the reason they traded Karl Anthony Towns. That's part of the reason they didn't re-sign Alexander Walker. They got under the second apron for this year. They'll need to stay there for the next 2 years in order to gain access to that pick and use it in a trade. Until then, they can't involve a pick in a trade, and so they're going to be limited. They can aggregate players being a first apron team. So I wanted to call them out because the package I like for LaMelo Ball to the Timberwolves, Julius Randle, Rob Dillingham, and then take your pick with another young player. Maybe it's Terrence Shannon Jr., maybe it's Jalen Clark, maybe it's Behringer, but the money works for that 3-for-1. If Charlotte is enamored enough with Dillingham plus the other young player, maybe they go for it. Again, they've shown no willingness to add a guy like Julius Randle to their team. I think they're going to want picks, so I doubt that the trade is going to happen, but I do love the idea of LaMelo Ball on the Wolves. I think they need shooting from their point guard spot, but if you add a 6'7" LaMelo Ball to Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid, and Rudy Gobert, that is a huge dominant lineup. And again, there's injury risk with LaMelo Ball. I think some of that is overblown. I wonder if he milked some of that because there's really no great reason to want to come back and play for the Hornets. So I wanted to mention Minnesota, but the team that I think is actually the most likely outside of Sacramento and Brooklyn that I mentioned is Toronto. And Toronto's made trades like this before. They love to acquire an asset that's depreciated and has a limited market. They just did that for Brandon Ingram, a trade that was clearly a win. A lot of people downplayed it because players like Brandon Ingram, who aren't particularly good outside shooters and aren't particularly good individual defenders, they're just bucket getters. A lot of times they're seen as not winning players. But I loved the trade at the time. You can go back and listen to my episode about that. But what would the trade be? I believe it would be Emmanuel Quickley plus a young player. Now, that could be Agbaji. That could be Murray Boyles, who just got drafted in the top 10. Maybe Jacoby Walter. I do not think Grady Dick would be on the table, but that's money-wise a possibility. And then the Raptors own all of their picks going forward. So you could do 2 picks on a swap. I think Charlotte getting Quickley to plug into that point guard position, they probably get a bit worse with that swap of Quickley and Ball. They grab another young player. I think they'd be most interested in Murray Boyles. They grab that player plus a couple of picks. This is a trade that would work for all sides. The Raptors get Ball on a reasonable contract. He's making less than $40 million for the next several years. He fits pretty nicely, in my opinion, with the group that they have, gives them some offensive punch. This is the kind of trade that Toronto loves to see. It just makes the most sense. And Toronto's also a team that a lot of analysts picked to not do so well this year. I picked them to do well, so I'm not surprised by their start. I'm patting myself on the back for that. But the point is that there are NBA minds that think that this isn't real and that this is actually a mediocre team and that they're at the bottom end of the playoff picture, if not missing it entirely. Charlotte may feel that way as well and think that there's a lot of value to the picks that they'd get from Toronto. Just as a closing thought, I just want to reiterate that the way Charlotte runs their team is the opposite of what we preach here on Basketball Gospel. You've screwed around with the beginning of LaMelo's career to the point that he's now frustrated and wants to leave, and now you have to start over again. You find your number one and you get building. This team hasn't built anything over the years. They've been content drafting number 5, number 6, around that range. I just hate it. This is not how I would run a team. It's not what we preach here. And this LaMelo Ball situation was easy to see coming. Nobody wants to play for a team that has no interest in investing or in the infrastructure to support a career of a young player like him. So he needs to go somewhere else, and for his sake, I hope he does.